Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us for another video session with one of the leaders here at SecureOps. Today we have Eric Duval. He's a Senior Security Manager or Senior SOC Manager here at SecureOps. He's worked in a variety of different roles in the Security Operations Center in his 8-year tenure, and we're so happy to welcome you, Eric. Thanks for joining us today. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Robert. So I started at SecureOps 8 years ago as a level 1 network security analyst. So as a level 1, my job entailed performing triage and investigations on security alert from both intrusion detection systems and SIM products. I also did some scripting and automation back then. Later on, I became a level 2 analyst, and now my role moved slightly from monitoring, still some monitoring, but more into designing processes, playbooks, as well as doing qualification, basically reviewing the level 1 work and then deciding what to submit to our customers for them to respond to incidents. After that, I worked on a contract with one of our American customers for about a year to deploy their SIM infrastructure and configure it. So I spent most of the year configuring log sources, talking to various IT groups in that organization to coordinate getting their log sources into the system. Then I worked on configuring it, developing dashboards, correlation rules, reports, training some of their staff. And that gave me a lot of experience covering pretty much everything in SIM, so it was a great experience. And after that, I did some level 3 work as a network security analyst until I was promoted to management. So now my role is less technical, but I manage the SOC, so it's just my responsibilities shifted, and now it's more about building our capabilities and making sure that our customers are satisfied with our services.
Wow, that's fantastic, and it's such a great background with so many different pieces of the SOC. So in your opinion, SOCs or security operations centers are set up so differently based on industry and size of the organization that they're geared to protect. Can you tell us a little bit about maybe the structure of the SOC in general?
Sure. Well, no matter the size of the organization, there's usually some common roles that you'll see everywhere. In a small SOC, these roles might be performed with a single individual. In a larger SOC, you'll have then more separation of duties, as well as some more specialized role. But generally speaking, you'll have your monitoring team who review activities on your network from your security and network tools, such as they'll review firewall logs, proxy logs in a SIM, and perform investigations to detect security incidents. Then you have your incident responders who are, first of all, they will confirm the incident by sometimes by actually working on the machine itself. They might contain the machine if it has some kind of infection, ensure that they can investigate while preserving the evidence. And then after incident responders, you'll usually have security content developers who will build some of the detection functionality of your technology. So a SIM will already have some alerts out of the box, but they won't perform well. So usually you'll have one of your teams building that content on an ongoing basis. And finally, you have the administrators of the technology. Sometimes it's an IT department that does this, but sometimes it's in the SOC, and they'll keep whether it's IDS or SIM or other tools, they'll keep configuring them, troubleshooting them, making sure people have the proper level of access and performance to these technologies. So it's mostly these 4 roles. They will break further down into various specializations in the large organizations, but generally it's monitoring, it's incident response, content development, and administration of the technology.
That's so interesting. So given all those different technical roles, what advice would you give to an analyst just getting started out in this career or just getting started out as a level 1 analyst in a SOC?
Sure. I like that question. I like helping analysts work on their career, and it's a great field to work in. So I have 4 things to say, but I'll start with the one that I think is sometimes left aside. So the first thing that people want to build their career should work on is communication. It's not technical, it's not as cool as cybersecurity, in my opinion, but it's very, very important. It does not matter what great idea you have if you cannot communicate it to other people, or if because of troubles in how you communicate, people won't listen to you. And so working on communication itself is worth investing time, whether it's doing Toastmasters or there's a book, Crucial Communication, that I would recommend, or the Communication Guys podcast. These are excellent resources for this. And I advise anybody starting a career in cybersecurity or even other fields, work on your communication skills. It's advice I also need to listen to and work on myself. But then the next three are more technical training, but I'm separating them in three categories. I would say there's fundamentals training, where you need to continually work on your networking, operating systems knowledge, and get in depth with these domains, also programming. So I would consider these fundamentals. And then you have security training, which is where you'll start seeing more specialized course training, for example, in computer forensics, intrusion analysis, incident response, penetration testing, reverse engineering malware. So security training, often that's done through certifications. And finally, the last one would be tools and technology training, meaning if, for example, your company uses IBM QRadar as their SIM technology, well, there is a community edition that you can freely install at home. And if you do that, then you have administrator access, and then you can actually practice the types of skills that you would be performing if you were in a more advanced role. For example, if we're a content engineer or a level 2 or 3 analyst, you'd have more access. Well, you can do that at home and practice with IBM QRadar. And that's really what's going to show your interest to your manager, that you're learning, you know the technology very well, and you can be trusted with a more difficult position where they won't need to teach you necessarily everything. So again, communication, fundamentals, security, and then tools training. I think that's a good breakdown of how to advance in your security career.
Yeah, that's excellent advice.
This conference will now be recorded.
So Eric, let's transition a little bit. As a SOC manager, you must have a great understanding of what SOCs could do better to identify threats. What 2 or 3 pieces of advice would you give to SOC managers like yourself to help prevent threats?
Sure. So I think the first thing, and very likely the most important, is to gain a very good understanding of what role IT plays in your business, so that you can prioritize defensive measures that protect your critical business assets or assets that are core to your business. It's not just a matter of being good at catching things in general. You need to be able to focus on the things that will impact your company the most. And that can differ between different companies. It can be reputation, it can be some critical assets that need to be up 24/7, maybe for your online stores. It can be some of your strategic plans and information or IP. So you have to know your business. It's not just about cybersecurity. It's also about, it is, cybersecurity is there because you're there to protect the business. So I would say it's important to have that focus, and sometimes it can take the backseat, so to speak, because it's, oh, we're building new capabilities all the time. Yeah, but are they related to your business? Do they really matter for your company? So you got to focus on that. The next part I would say is to favor building long-term capabilities over responding to short-term operations, or basically you don't want to get too bogged down into the day-to-day. You might be able to detect a lot of things in your first year where you build your SOC or you build a SIM, but really maybe you're just spending all your time detecting spyware or something that should be important in an ideal world, but really it's not your core business, and you're not even looking at protecting your core business yet if you're focusing on that. So you got to focus on long-term capabilities, because otherwise you will get too bogged down into the day-to-day. And that's really where you'll get that value from your security efforts. And finally, it's to leverage different capabilities and how you approach detection of security incidents. So There's no one method. No one will be able to provide you a roadmap that you then build out over the next 3 years. You need a team that's agile, creative, that's empowered to make some decisions, and also that uses a variety of methods to determine what kind of security content is important to build right now. Yeah, I think these would be all good pieces of advice for a manager.
Yeah, I agree. Great strategic advice. So if we dig into that question just a little bit deeper, what advice would you give organizations? You know, what challenges do you think they're facing that are most critical then?
Sure. Well, part of the biggest challenge is due to the state of cybersecurity, well, the workforce, there's a lot of jobs in cybersecurity, and so that creates some issues. But generally, some of the issues you'll have are, one is called alert fatigue, and I would say the other one is information overload. I mean, these are issues that are solvable, but they're often the first things that you land into when you build your SOC. So for alert fatigue, security detection technologies generate a lot of false positives. So they don't have a very high accuracy in general. There's exceptions, but in general, they're noisy. And it can be demotivating and also very dull and boring and tedious to perform the same investigations for the same alert over and over when you're convinced that's going to be the 500th time it's a false positive. So alert fatigue, dealing with false positives can affect your team's morale. And so it's important to deal with this by putting enough efforts into mitigating the issue via tuning or just purchasing technologies that work better. But then the other part I say would be information overload. Unless you perform at least some level of automation, your analyst will be working with 20 different browser windows and for every investigation, and it takes a toll on anyone to multitask and to have that much information related to their investigation at once. So information overload is also something that really affects people's performance and their morale when working in a SOC.
Yeah, that's great. So Eric, when you look at the Verizon Data Breach Report or the annual Ponymon report, one of the things that you're seeing is that organizations are really having a difficult time protecting themselves and protecting the privacy of their customers. And they're probably paying the price more than we've ever seen in terms of fines, Equifax fines, and ransomware, payments on ransomware. What would be your advice to these organizations?
Sure. Well, I would start though by just saying that it is true there's fines and companies are paying for it, but if we take a look, for example, at Equifax, the data that was stolen is very important, and there's controversy even about whether they have enough funds to pay fines that they've agreed to pay for their customers. So I would say the customers are the ones paying the price. Organizations are paying some of the price. But though, to get back to the root of the question, the problem is that cybersecurity, the state of cybersecurity is that you're defending in an asymmetric battle. And so every group that wants to attack your organization with your 5 security employees, well, there's millions of attackers, and every time they prepare an attack, maybe they generate a script that can be useful in some scenario or another, then they orchestrate how they can perform an attack against an organization. Well, then they can reuse the same technology against a million other organizations at very little cost. And so attackers can attack everyone at very little cost. Organizations need to defend against every attacker possible. So that's one issue. And the other issue is, unlike actual guerrilla warfare, there is almost no consequence for the attackers, for the guerrillas, you could say. They can be well-funded, they can have government support, they can have support from criminal organizations that are extremely well-funded, more than your company, perhaps, if you're a medium company with a security staff. And so all these attackers need to do is to be lucky once or skilled once at attacking your organization, and that's all they need to do. Well, you need to be vigilant 24/7, 365 against everyone in the planet. So part of the problem here is because this is asymmetric, I think the only solution would be political. There needs to be international agreements or something. I'm not going to get too much into policy, but it's not a problem that even Walmart, as big as they are, can solve. Walmart cannot defend against the Chinese military budget that has, with all that expertise that they have, tens of thousands of people who are extremely skilled. You can expect even the biggest organizations to defend successfully against this all the time. So there is a way to deal with this, is to face the reality that you will be breached. Most organizations learn that they've been breached many months later, even years later, from a third party, not from their own efforts. So you got to make sure that you're preparing for that, or that you're taking steps to mitigate the damage that can happen if you are breached, by making sure that you apply proper security practices on your network so that you don't put all that critical customer data on your web server, or things, simple things, but they're not really done consistently everywhere. So organizations need to prepare for a breach and take it seriously and protect their core business. And their core business includes their reputation, it includes their customer data, and that's really it. They need to focus on what matters the most to them, because something will happen at some point.
So Eric, on your website, there's a really interesting report. It's called the Rise of Ransomware Report. And obviously you can't turn the news pages these days without seeing a story about ransomware, whether it's schools in Texas that are being attacked and having to pay a ransom, or governments in Florida that are having to pay a ransom. What advice would you give organizations, or what have you seen organizations do differently because of these different strains of ransomware, the potential of a ransomware attack?
Sure. Well, though ransomware, when ransomware started, it may have been a new vector or a new type of attack. There is a precedent for that type of scenario, which is through computer worms. And so for a while, organizations needed to deal with the possibility that one of their computers on their network would be infected, and it would spread to their entire network or to all the possible vulnerable machines, and then damage the ability, maybe damage the ability of these machines to function. So organizations adapted to this to some extent, some didn't, but that can greatly mitigate against ransomware, because a lot of it can also act as a computer worm. One person gets infected, but then the software may have capabilities to then spread to other people in your network. So it's not like the first time that organizations try to defend against this type of scenario of how it gets to your network and how it spreads. The difference is the type of damage it does, and the fact that because it's extremely lucrative for attackers, that there's more money to make, so they'll get more creative and they'll try harder. Now it's no longer just vandalists who do worms. Now it's people who want to make money. So for organizations, some of the change related to this, well, one is there's more awareness about it because of what happened to a couple organizations. There's awareness campaigns to tell your employees how to deal with that, to respond very quickly, to call for help, to not worry about what your computer screen says. If it says that they found something illegal on your computer, no, just call IT or call your security team. So this is some of the changes that happen because of the high profile of ransomware, as well as proper backup and restoring procedures. On the other hand, though, for a SOC specifically, we don't set the policies of our customers because we're an MSSP, but on our side, the change in our practice has really been on preparation and on response time, meaning we need our processes to deal with this effectively, to very quickly assess the nature of the malware, if it is ransomware or not, is it spreading or not, what does that computer or person who is logged into the computer, what do they have access to? Can this thing spread to other computers, or can it overwrite or encrypt data in our network shares with business data? And so we need to be very quick at responding to this and then telling our customer, you got to log down that account, you got to throw that machine off the network, and you need to go check it out immediately. So it changed things for us in that sense. Well, for organizations, it's more about backups, awareness, and properly defending their network, meaning don't open up every port on your internal network. So those types of things.
That's great. So one of the things that most of us have read over the past year is that Gartner has suggested that almost 60% of these small businesses are going to outsource either part or all of their security operations centers. What are the challenges they're having, and what are they looking to outsource?
Well, to understand why small or medium organizations need to do that, we can look at larger organizations and see what makes up their security operations. And in a large organization, like I mentioned earlier, you have the monitoring team, incident response, content, platform administrator. In a larger organization, you'll have different other things on top of that. You'll have people who do forensics, reverse engineering malware, you'll have threat intelligence specialists, and you maybe have breakdowns and specialties even among people who do a similar type of task. So a small company doesn't need to do every single one of these tasks, but they need to do a lot of them, including some tasks that are across different domains of expertise or of skills. So a small business that has 200 computers doesn't need 5 people looking at everything 24/7, and they don't need somebody to do computer forensics on a day-to-day basis. So they might want to outsource digital forensics in case they have an incident. They might want to pay a retainer or something, or hire a consulting firm to deal with it when there is an issue and they need somebody to investigate to that level of depth and expertise. But it's not worth hiring an extremely expensive technical specialist for work that you might do twice a year in a small business. So I think it has to do with the scale of these companies. It makes more sense for them, given the variety of skills they need, to outsource, either through consulting firms or MSSPs. So that's pretty much, I think, the reason for this.
So Eric, this has been a great interview. We have one final question for you. So what would you recommend to a business who's considering investing in their SOC, so trying to beef it up, or starting a SOC even from scratch? What important points would you tell them?
Great question. I think the most important thing would be you need C-level sponsorship for your SOC. The COO can be a particularly useful and powerful advocate for the SOC. The reason being, first of all, the COO is the person most likely to be well aware of all the business operations, and therefore they can really help you break down some barriers in achieving your objectives. But the other reason is because of the nature of cybersecurity. First of all, we're not a business unit that generates money for companies. We're loss prevention in a sense. And so if you need, and yet a lot of our work requires help or coordination or collaboration from other departments. So if I need the IT department to contain, isolate, or do some work on a bunch of servers, and they're thinking instead of their deadline for their important project to deploy some stuff for operations, they're doing stuff for the business, so they're right. Their deadline might be more important than what I need the service for. But as the SOC is going to be a different department, it helps if they have that C-level sponsorship so that they can get stuff done regardless of which department they need help from. There needs to be trust of the security department or of the SOC. Your business users, your business managers, and so on need to respect the fact that the work the SOC does is important. And so if you don't have your C-level sponsorship, anything you need from anyone in your company, that's not going to be anybody's priority other than your own. So that's why you really need that sponsorship. Another piece of advice I would give, though, is in terms of, okay, you have a new SOC or you're upgrading your SOC, is if you have some budget to spend on your SOC, don't just throw it all away on the new technology that some vendors like demoed for you that looks super impressive and futuristic. The truth is a lot of the technology out there is either worthless or doesn't accomplish its objectives fully, because a lot of it doesn't achieve their objectives fully out of the box without your staff working on it continually for years. It's not enough, therefore, to just buy the thing. You also need to hire more staff. So I would suggest companies to look at the technology you have already and make sure that your communication channels with your staff are such that you would know if that technology was misused or not. If there's some technology that's left unused or that's poorly configured because nobody has the time to properly make it work, there's no point in buying some other bunch of machine learning or super AI appliances that are going to do everything for you, because you know what, they will do nothing for you until you put in 5,000 man hours more into configuring that technology as well. So spend money on your staff, build them, empower them, work on your communication channels with your staff, because they have their eyes on what's happening and they can help your decision making. Don't just listen to the vendors who want to sell you more hardware, more cool technology that's going to solve your problems, because it won't. Your staff will, however.
Yeah, I love the answer to that question. I think that's a great way to stop our interview today. We have never had anybody with your kind of experience with digital forensic investigations, to incident response, to managing a SOC, to dealing with all the issues with a SIM. So we really appreciate all your insight, all the practical advice you've given us. Everybody, thank you for joining us today, and especially thank you, Eric Duval, for all your great insight. We look forward to seeing you again in the future, and everybody else, have a great day.
Thank you.